All right, let's get into it. Today we are breaking down one of the biggest economic catastrophes in modern history, the Great Depression. We're going to look at how the absolute wild party of the Roaring '20s suddenly and very violently stopped, and how that crisis didn't just break the bank, it pretty much broke America itself.
So let's just start with a number that's almost impossible to wrap your head around. $200 billion. That's the amount of wealth, of savings, of actual dreams that just, poof, vanished into thin air. And we're not talking about monopoly money here. This was real homes, college funds, entire family futures. Gone.
To really get the crash, you have to understand the party that came before it, and what a party it was. We're talking about a decade of just pure, unfiltered optimism, incredible jazz music, and an economic boom that honestly felt like it would never, ever end.
And the vibe back then? It was absolutely electric. Cities were just exploding with energy, with new technology. You had the Model T rolling off assembly lines like never before. You had radios crackling to life in something like 10 million homes, broadcasting the sound of a brand new, modern America. But here's the thing. This party wasn't for everybody. Not even close. While the cities were thriving on this new idea of buy now, pay later, rural America was already in the middle of its own quiet depression. See, farmers had massively ramped up production for World War I, but now European farms were back online, and crop prices just fell through the floor. It left them with crippling debt for all this new machinery they couldn't afford.
So how did the bubble get so big? Well, look no further than the margin loan. This was the engine. Margin loans basically turned the stock market into a casino, where it felt like you could never lose. Think about it. You could buy $100 of stock with just $10 down. What could possibly go wrong?
And this mania, it was absolutely infectious. You were getting stock tips from your shoeshine boy, from bellhops, you name it. The market quadrupled in just 5 years and was totally disconnected from what companies were actually earning. It wasn't about the fundamentals anymore. It was all about the vibes.
Now, few people, a very few, saw the cracks forming in the foundation. But in the middle of a party this loud, nobody wanted to listen. The sound of all that cash being made was just too deafening. But that party was about to come to a screeching, grinding halt.
Yep, here's one of those guys, economist Roger Babson. He literally stood up a month before the crash and tried to sound the alarm. And what did Wall Street do? They basically laughed at him and told him to go touch grass. The party kept going because nobody wanted to hear it.
And then it happened. In one absolutely catastrophic week in October of 1929, the whole house of cards just came tumbling down. It started with a little tremor on Thursday, and by the next Tuesday, it was a full-blown, world-shattering earthquake. And this just illustrates the unbelievable scale of the collapse. 25%. A quarter of the entire market's value just gone in 48 hours. Those ticker tapes, the machines printing out stock prices, they were spitting out numbers so fast they were hours behind. Just a blur of total disaster.
The crash then set off this horrifying chain reaction. First, the brokers started demanding their money back, the money from those margin loans, from investors who were now completely broke. And that panic spread like wildfire straight to the banks, which, as it turned out, were also built on worthless paper and blind faith.
See, the thing to remember is that the stock market crash was just one event, a terrible one, for sure. But the Great Depression, that was a decade-long reality. It was a whole era of suffering on a scale America had never, ever seen before. The party was officially over.
And here's the most crucial point: unemployment. It skyrocketed from a pretty healthy 3% to a catastrophic 25%. Let that sink in. 1 in every 4 Americans who wanted a job simply could not find one.
And this wasn't just some economic statistic. This was a complete human catastrophe. We're talking about endless breadlines snaking through cities, families forced to live in shanty towns they called Hoovervilles, and on top of it all, an environmental disaster in the Great Plains called the Dust Bowl that literally blotted out the sun.
And the government's response? Well, President Hoover believed that big federal aid programs were, and I quote, un-American. He completely failed to grasp the scale of the crisis. His name became so tied to the suffering that it was a shorthand for hardship, and it all culminated in the U.S. Army being used against its own protesting veterans.
So by 1933, the country wasn't just broke, it was broken. People were absolutely desperate. They were looking for a new leader, someone who promised one thing above everything else: action.
And with these 8 simple words, Franklin D. Roosevelt gave the country the first deep breath it had taken in years. He completely shifted the national focus away from panic and towards a sense of purpose, away from despair and toward a plan.
Now, FDR's New Deal wasn't some single master plan. It was a whole series of bold, sometimes messy experiments. But they were all guided by these 3 R's. First, relief. Direct, immediate help to stop the bleeding. Then, recovery. Programs to get the economy's engine restarted. And finally, reform. Making fundamental changes, like insuring bank deposits, to make sure this could never, ever happen again.
And what's so crucial to understand is that this went way beyond just jobs programs. This was a complete rethinking of the government's role in people's lives. I mean, the creation of Social Security, that was monumental. It was basically a promise that the country would provide a basic safety net for its citizens. It changed the entire fabric of American society.
The recovery, though, it was a slow, grinding process. There was no single victory parade. It was built on millions of tiny wins, day after day. Those soul-crushing breadlines were gradually, painstakingly replaced by the assembly lines of a reawakening America. A transition built with blistered hands and, for the first time in a long time, the return of hope. In life, it slowly started to come back. People actually went to the movies again to see The Wizard of Oz, where a gray world suddenly explodes into color. Swing music was back on the radio, and the skylines once again looked like they were rising instead of falling.
But if we're being honest, the Great Depression didn't really end because of a government program. The final push, the thing that really ended it, was the world shifting gears toward another, even bigger global conflict. American factories started humming again, but this time they were retooling for war.
So as America finally got back on its feet, it didn't realize that something else, something massive, was already on the horizon. Which leaves us with a pretty heavy final thought. How does a nation that just survived a total economic collapse prepare itself to enter a world at war?